Today, we are joined by Euan Walker, a seasoned tech and product leader with a remarkable 27-year career dedicated to solving customer problems and driving business success. Euan's experience spans across complex technology delivery, innovative product design, and leading transformative organizational change on a global scale. Euan has made his mark at several prestigious companies, including CGU, Infosys, ANZ, Verency, and most recently with Judo Bank. In his roles within banking and consulting, Euan has often been the go-to leader for turning around troubled areas, bringing a creative, fun approach to inspire teams and achieve exceptional results. His focus on developing high-performing teams and truly meeting customer needs has been the cornerstone of his success.
I didn't have the ability to really influence the way I wanted to at a technical level. I wasn't loving the job. I thought, I've got to do something different. So when I came back into the office, there was a restructure. I'm like, you can deal me out, please. I want to go and do something else.
Yeah, great.
And I didn't know what that something else was. I was looking around and I was considering, do I want to try the civil service? And then I met someone who said, I've got an idea for a startup, but I don't know how to make it happen. Do you want to come on that journey? I'm like, hell yeah. When are you going to get that opportunity? So it's an interesting thing. Often we think about startup as things that you do when you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
You don't do them when you're in your 40s, when you've got two kids at private school. But this is an opportunity that I've left ANZ by choice because I want to go and do something different. This is the something different. And what's the worst that could happen? I could give this a crack. We could not get funding. And so in 6 months, that redundancy money is going to be gone and I'm going to have to go and get a real job. Okay, that's fine. Or it might work and we go for a year and a half and then I have to go and get a real job. Okay. Or it works and I can retire and I can teach people how to build robots and that sounds great too. And so I thought, I'm going to leap on that as an opportunity. So it was more that I had just reconsidered where I was at with my life and thought that's what I want to change.
That's an incredible moment. It took that accident situation for you to get that time to pause, to reflect, because it's very easy to be on the train.
Yep.
Not really knowing where the stations are, and you're just kind of going and going and going, and you've become the victim of your own success by the sound of it, because you're moving into bigger roles and probably away from what you really enjoyed and what you were passionate about into this kind of bureaucracy, only because you were so good at what you did.
And there was conversations about, would you be interested in this role and this role? And I ended up at the end saying, I'd love that job. It's a transformation job. It's really hard. And it's like, no, there's someone earmarked for that role. I'm like, okay. Yeah. And it was an interesting point when you go, I'm okay with calling time here. I've loved my time here.
Yeah.
I loved the people I worked for. I had some great bosses. At the end, I worked for a guy called Gary Strain, who I think actually now is retired to become an academic. He was great as a boss. I had some incredible peers on my leadership team who've now gone on to run some of the big consulting firms and are divisional CIOs at other big four. Like there were some great people that I worked with, but it was time. And it's the interesting thing that I often say to people who are trying to deal with some major event in their life. That was a horrible year of my life, dealing with the injury and the ramification and like ongoing pain and so forth. But I wouldn't take it back, because what it led to me was a really real clarity about what I wanted to do with my life. That's not to say I won't ever go back to a big four, but I really became very clear about what I did and did not want out of my life. And so I became much more focused on achieving kind of a really high level of alignment of values and enjoyment and love of what I did.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, you mentioned that you then went to a startup. Interesting, actually. I was reading something recently, and it said a startup with a founder who's 50 is something like 20 times more likely to succeed than a startup with someone that's 20. The Mark Zuckerbergs are the anomalies of this world. So it's interesting when you kind of talk about coming later in life into a startup, because you've got all that experience. You've seen so many things. What in being in that environment, what do you think is the secret to success for a tech startup?
Yes. Just say yes.
Yeah. Yes to everything?
Yeah, almost. When you start a startup, you have a product idea. We had a product idea. It's a great product idea. We were 3 years late to market. the Apple Wallet effectively crucified us before it had even launched. By the time we got there, the product was wrong. But we kind of walked in and said, right, we've got this one product idea. We don't know if that's going to work. So as we build it, and this is how I tend to think about a lot of things, let's not build for that individual problem set. Let's build the tool that allows us solve that problem. And so we were looking at one stage around, we're in the card space around payments, and we were looking at controls. And controls are, do I allow international transactions and so forth?
Yep.
And my head of engineering, a guy called Chad Harris, he had the notion, I'd love to claim credit for it, but it was Chad who said this. Chad said, well, rather than hard coding them, we should just make that a script. We're building this in Clojure. Clojure's really good for script decisioning. We should do this in script so that if transaction is from one of these countries, then block. I'm like, that's a brilliant idea. So he built the engine, and the engine was script-based. Well, once you have that engine, all of a sudden you can start to do anything you want to any transaction. You can interrogate it in any way. You can take any action. And so we architected this really, really simple idea of, I have a thing, it meets some conditions, I take an action. Like really basic building block stuff. But because of that, when the original product didn't succeed the way it wanted to, we were able to say, well, we can use that to start doing things like charity roundups and real-time discounting and build your own card, because I can turn on and off all of the features of the card. So if you go to banks in the Middle East now, most of them have build your own card capability. Well, that was us. We built that, took it out to the Middle East, got implemented, hugely successful, hugely engaging. But it was all of this idea that we weren't trying to build the problem, a software to solve the individual problem. We built a tool set that solved some other stuff. And I also then stepped out of the technology role, and the founder, who had a very specific idea, like, well, I think there's a whole lot more we can do with this. So I'm going to start managing the product as well. And then one day I think I just changed my signature file as well to say Chief Technology and Product Officer. And so I started doing a lot of pre-sale stuff and working with our customers to develop potential new products. And they would say, hey, can you do this? And because I designed the entire thing with Chad, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And I was able to commit, and I'm like, get back to the hotel. Chad, I need you to build this thing. I'm doing a demo tomorrow. And I think that what made us able to keep on going was that flexibility to say yes and not to have hard restrictions, but also because everything we built was all about how do we operate as efficiently as possible with the smallest amount of resource that we've got. I think at our biggest, the engineering team got to like 10 people.
But so how do you, in that situation, because a lot of tech startups are overwhelmed with ideas, yet how they manifest those ideas, or they kind of they come into reality, or they over engineer those ideas, or they drag them out for too long beyond the point of viability. So how do you know when an idea has got legs and when you need to can it?
That was absolutely an ongoing discussion inside the business. We used to jokingly refer to our sales deck as the takeaway menu, because there was far too much in that. Really, the company, and I have to say, so I left the company. I was there for 6 years. The company is still going. So that in and of itself is a statistical miracle. Particularly after some stuff that happened during COVID. But there was a lot on that menu, and progressively we learned that the customers really, really just focused, depending on who you were, focused on one or two things off that menu. And so we left a lot of the capability there, but not fully developed. I used to refer to it as, this is ready to show, this is ready to sell, this is ready to use. And we would build everything ready to show, but do not go off the beaten path, do not put unexpected data in there, do not expect there to be error handling off this function. But it was a proof of concept. We could show that we could do that. Ready to sell, I could give a working demo to someone and they could play with it because it had error handling, but it wasn't ready to use, whereas ready to use, it's self-recovery and everything else. So that curation, that was a real issue and a real sore spot within the organization. The sales guys wanted to have everything in their arsenal. But then progressively over time, we got to a point where actually maintaining this is going to start becoming really costly.
Yeah.
And so we really focused down onto a couple of key things.
I think, to summarise that, the quote I heard recently, and I forget where, but I'm not going to take credit for this, but it was most tech startups suffer with indigestion, not starvation.
Yes.
And that kind of really pricked my curiosity, because I was just trying to, meeting people like yourself is just interesting how you navigate through that. But it sounds like it's a bit suck it and see, to be honest with you.
It is. And our biggest learning was we were selling something that plugged into the payments infrastructure of a bank or to a credit card scheme. Those are hard places to integrate to. They're incredibly security conscious, and they're problematic. We had one implementation that went for well over a year, and we were ready on, like, they signed the contract. We fully provisioned everything within 24 hours.
Yeah. And
it took them more than a year to integrate. And so I moved out of the tech role into a pure chief product officer role. And the first major new product that I developed, it started with the idea of how do I avoid, as a product constraint, how do I avoid needing to talk to corporate security? How do I avoid plugging into the infrastructure of the payment stuff? How do I get rid of everything that slowed us down? That product, which is now the product of the company, was around environmental awareness, education, real-time scoring, and around the impact a transaction has.
Yeah.
And the ability to do offsets in very public, verified carbon or environmental offset programs of your choice. And part of the build for that was you can sell this and go live within 2 weeks. And actually putting that in place, and that was not a thing at the time that everyone in the company was a fan of. They're like, no, we want this thing that locks us in for 5 years. And you're like, yeah, but those are hard to sell. And that really informing the product basis around what is a much easier sell was something that it took us years till we got to that point. Yeah, right. And that I think marked the turning point in the company.
That's almost your kind of minimal viable product, right? As in just to get something out there, being used, someone paying for it, and then get things moving beyond that point.
And it's now, that particular product's now in a dozen banks all across Southeast Asia. It's been really, really successful, and the implementations have been incredibly simple because it was specifically designed around, single API calls, and that's all you need to do. And it's that sort of thing that I think it's a shame we hadn't realized that earlier. In the company. Like, that was a hard-earned lesson because we were all in love with the original idea and the idea of we're in this forever. But anyone who's ever put software into a bank knows that banks never rip software out. So even if it's a single API, you're probably in there for 5 years anyway. So it was kind of this thing of that was a very hard-earned lesson that I wish we'd known earlier.
It's you're making me think of all these quotes that I kind of come across, and I'm always curious, I guess, around learning. But one of the quotes is, fall in love with your customers' problems, not your solutions.
And early, we were definitely in love with our solution, and late in it, we were definitely in love with the customer. And so I've never heard that quote, but I love it. That really probably took us half the life of the company to make that change.
Yeah, fantastic.